Hello, poetry enthusiast. Welcome to Poetic Duchess. Today, we're embarking on a journey through the world of poetry, exploring various styles and movements that have shaped literary history. From ancient epics to contemporary spoken word, join me as we delve into the rich tapestry of poetic expression. Our journey begins in the ancient and classical era, predating 500 CE, where epic poetry like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey and the lyric poetry of Sappho, one of the most renowned female poets of antiquity, grace the literary scenes. Much of the work of the ancient Greek poet Sappho has been lost over the centuries, and only fragments of her poetry survive. However, one of the most famous and often quoted fragments is from the poem known as Fragment 1. Originally written in ancient Greek, our passage today was translated by Edwin Marion Cox. It goes as follows. Deathless Aphrodite of the spangled mine, child of Zeus, who twist lures, I beg you, weaver of schemes never break, with pains unspoken, my heart, O queen. These fragments offer glimpses into Sappho's exploration of love, desire, and relationships, showcasing the elegance and emotional depth of her poetry. Now moving into the medieval period, spanning 500 to 1500 CE, we encounter the heroic tales of Anglo-Saxon poetry, including the timeless Beowulf and the romantic troubadour and trouvère poetry from France. Let us read a short passage from the timeless Beowulf. I've never known fear. As a youth I fought in endless battles. I am old now, but I will fight again, seek fame still, if the dragon hiding in his tower dares to face me. This quote encapsulates Beowulf's fearless spirit and his unwavering commitment to seeking glory, even in the face of formidable adversary. It highlights the heroic ethos that is a central theme in the epic poem. Fast forward to the Renaissance, which spanned the 16th to 17th centuries, where Elizabethan poets like William Shakespeare ruled the stage. And while there were fewer recorded female voices, this era saw the emergence of brilliant poets like Anne Bradstreet, America's first published poet. Bradstreet's work were produced in the mid-17th century, and her first collection, The 10th Muse Lately Sprung Up in America, was published in 1650. This places her firmly in the colonial American era. The Renaissance, categorized by a revival of interest in classical learning, humanism, and artistic innovation, had largely concluded in Europe by the time Bradstreet was writing in the American colonies. But let's include her here simply because of the timeline and my personal desire to squeeze our brilliant female literary geniuses anywhere I can. Moving back to the Renaissance era, let me share a quote from one of my personal favorite William Shakespeare plays, Romeo and Juliet. And yes, I do love the Leo and Claire Danes adaptation of 1996. John Leguizamo was epic as Tybalt, but I digress. Good night, parting is such sweet sorrow, that I shall say good night till it be morrow. This quote is from the balcony scene where Romeo and Juliet express their love for each other. The juxtaposition of sweet sorrow captures the bittersweet nature of goodbye, and it reflects the complexities and nuances of love in Shakespeare's writing. Moving on, the neoclassical era, ranging from the late 17th to the 18th centuries, brought us the elegant Augustan poetry of Alexander Pope and John Dryden, reflecting a return to classical themes and forms. Anna Letitia Barbald, a significant figure of the time, contributed to the literary landscape. A small quote from Anna, which expresses her imaginative voice of a mouse appealing for mercy with a plea for compassion, is as follows: "Spare, spare me, a small poor mouse, and I'll never trouble your house. I shall ever grateful be, if you'll pardon even me." Now, come to my personal favorite, the Romantic poets spanning the late 18th to the early 19th centuries, such as Wordsworth, Coleridge, Byron, Shelley, and my personal favorite, John Keats, who celebrated nature, emotion, and individualism in their revolutionary works. Let's not forget Mary Shelley, known for her novel Frankenstein, who also dabbled in poetry. Taken from Mary Shelley's famous Frankenstein, "I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel." This quote is spoken by the creature that Victor Frankenstein creates. The creature, often referred to as Frankenstein's monster, expresses his sense of isolation and loneliness, comparing himself to both Adam, the first man in monotheistic tradition, and a fallen angel. It reflects the creature's complex identity and the existential themes explored in the novel. Now, moving on to Victorian poetry in the 19th century. Victorian poets like Tennyson, Robert Browning, and Elizabeth Barrett Browning, one of my personal favorites, grappled with societal changes throughout the 19th century. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, a prominent female poet, wrote the iconic Sonnets from the Portuguese and the epic Aurora Leigh. I hope to make an analysis video on all of the sonnets of the Portuguese in the future. Please give this video a thumbs up if you'd like to see those videos. Now, I'd like to sidetrack for a moment, please, so bear with me. Although some people may confuse Emily Dickinson as a Victorian poet, she is not typically classified as such, because her literary output and style are more closely associated with the mid-19th century American literary tradition than with the broader themes and characteristics of Victorian literature. While she lived during the same time period as the Victorian era, her work is often seen as distinct from the predominant literary trends of that era in Britain. There can be more said about this topic, but that's for another video. Now, back to Victorian poetry. Let me share one of my favorite Elizabeth Barrett Browning quotes. "And who saith, I loved once? Not angels, who clear eyes love foresee, love through eternity." Loved Once is by far one of my personal favorites. It explores the limitations and profundity of human love, contrasting it with divine and eternal love. It challenges the notion of restricting love to a singular moment, advocating for a deeper, enduring understanding of love. Next on our poetic journey is nestled in the early 20th century in modernist poetry, marked by movements like Imagism and masterpieces like T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland and W.B. Yeats' The Second Coming. Marianne Moore, a leading modernist poet, brought her unique voice to this era as well. Marianne Moore wrote a poem called Poetry. It begins like this: "I, too, dislike it. There are things that are important beyond all this fiddle. Reading it, however, with a perfect contempt for it, one discovers that there is in it, after all, a place for the genuine." In this poem, Moore explores the nature and purpose of poetry. She starts by admitting a dislike for poetry, but she then goes on to find a place for the genuine within it, expressing her complex relationship with the art form. Moore's poetry is often characterized by its precision, wit, and exploration of the natural world. Transitioning to contemporary times, spanning from the mid-20th century to the present, we encounter the beat poets like Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac, the confessional poetry of Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton, and the experimental postmodern works of Ashbery and Rich. Contemporary spoken word and slam poetry are graced by the powerful voices of poets like Warson Shire and Amanda Gorman. Before we conclude, I'd like to leave you with an excerpt from Anne Sexton's famous poem, Her Kind. I have found the warm caves in the woods, filled them with skillets, carvings, shelves, closets, silks, innumerable goods. Fix the suppers for the worms and the elves, whining, rearranging, and disaligned. A woman like that is misunderstood. I have been her kind. Her kind delves into themes of identity, societal expectations, and the complex nature of being a woman. The poem's vivid and advocative language captures a sense of defiance and self-awareness, and its powerful example of Anne Sexton's confessional and introspective style. And there you have it, a journey through the major historical and literary movements of poetry and a few of the influential female voices that have shaped its course. From Sappho to Anne Sexton, these poets have left an indelible mark on the literary landscape. I did want to conclude by saying, this does not include the specific movements and periods within all of the history of American poetry. I hope to cover this in another video. With that said, feel free to share your favorite poets or styles in the comments below. Until next time, keep exploring the beauty of words and the magic of poetry. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay inspired.